Previously on Turn a Wood Bowl. I purchased lumber, 2x6s and 2x4s, cut those down to size, made one really large blank, glued it up, clamped it up, made another smaller blank, put those through the bandsaw to round them off, went to my computer to design a coin funnel. I made a full-size template and started shaping the bottom portion of the coin funnel. I hollowed out the center, mounted it to the lathe, hollowed it all the way through, and then mounted the huge, ginormous bowl blank. I marked where the two would connect and started shaping the bottom of the coin funnel. This removed a lot of material and reduced weight. I flattened out the center, hollowed out the middle to match the other one, glued the two together, clamped them in place to let them dry overnight, and that's where we are right now. Whew. I'm loosening up the chuck, which is on the tailstock. This is highly unusual. I'm using a specialty mounting device that will fit into the tailstock to center items just like this, and this worked out really good in this instance. Now, if you had any questions about anything that you saw in the intro, check out the video before this. We go into all the details. Now, I'm using a waist block to bring the tailstock up for extra support here. It's always a good idea to have the tailstock in place so you have extra support when you're turning, if you can get it into place. And I can get it into place right now, so I want that extra support because this guy is really heavy. And when you have a heavy, large turning, it's always a good idea to have good tail support. Okay, so I'm going to shape the sides and I'm going to blend this bottom portion into the top portion. I do not want to see that seam that we're seeing right now where the two are glued together. Just kind of exploring. I'm looking straight down from my point of view. I'm determining the curve that I'm going to apply here. I want to be careful not to make too deep of a curve and remove a ton of material. Now, this is not going to be the most elegant bowl. I'm doing air quotes here for bowl because obviously this isn't really a bowl, but typically we want to make a bowl with very even, relatively thin walls. This is going to be pretty beefy, and I want it to be beefy intentionally because I want it to be very stable when I'm rolling coins on the top of this coin funnel. If we had a thin, lightweight turning, there's a chance that it could get bumped or it would move or vibrate, and that could affect how the coins are rolling, and I don't want that to happen. So we are going to let the bottom of this piece be really thick and beefy, but I want it to have a nice curve here, and that's what I'm working on right now. This is an unsupported grain cut, as you might know, but I really want to make sure that I'm getting just the curve here and nothing extra. If I kept going at it from the other direction or the supported grain cut, there's a good chance that I could undercut and make the cut too deep, and then I have to remove a lot more material. So if I go really slow and my bowl gouge is nice and sharp, I should be able to make a decent cut there, even though it's an unsupported pass. Now that I have that curve established, I can fine tune that and go back through with a nice supported cut here. So the other thing about keeping this piece beefy is the fact that this is all dry wood. I don't have to worry about the moisture content of this wood changing dramatically and distorting or moving the piece and making it move around. This wood should be very stable because it is kiln dried, and actually it's interesting because it's very brittle too, and I've heard other turners talk about turning kiln dried wood and having the issues of it being brittle and a little bit difficult to turn, and this is really difficult. Now granted, this is a pine, it might be a spruce, but it's in the conifer family, and it is really tricky on the end grain. You want to make very slow paced cuts with a very sharp bowl gouge and a supported grain cut, riding that bevel, and just gently let the bowl gouge slice the material so that you do not get end grain tear outs. If you get aggressive or you want to do this quickly, you're going to have issues. You're going to have a lot of tear outs. So you want to take your time here and just make really nice passes. Because this wood is nice and dry, I don't have to worry about the density and the variable densities. I can have a really thick bottom portion in this bowl, and the top can be relatively thin, and I don't have to worry about the moisture content and the drying cracking that. Now, if this were a solid piece of wood, say a log or a side grain piece of wood that had moisture in it, I would have to worry about thicker areas drying slower than thinner areas. And when those thin areas dry and the thick areas are still wet next to them, that's typically when cracking occurs. But because this wood is kiln dried, we don't have to worry about that. So we can have a really thick area and a really thin area, and it's no big deal. Okay, it's time to switch this thing around. I'm going to get it off the faceplate and get it mounted to the 4-jaw chuck. Now this is my largest faceplate and my largest 4-jaw chuck. This is a 6-inch faceplate and a 5-inch chuck. I'm using a mortise here. I don't typically use those. There's a couple reasons. Number one, I want to be able to get down there and grip this very easily. I want to be able to return it to the lathe when I need to, and leaving that mortise, recessed mortise in place will allow me to do that. The other thing is that because I'm hollowing out the center and drilling out the center, I want to make sure that that whole area is accessible and there's no pressure being clamped down on that. So if I had created the tenon, which I typically like to turn, which I've got a video on that if you want to check it out, the tenon would be compressing the wood fibers together, and if I drilled out that center portion, it would weaken the tenon. With the mortise, the recessed mortise, I'm putting pressure on the outside of that area, and the inside is relatively open. I just want to make sure I don't apply too much pressure. Now, I do need to sharpen my tools frequently. This harder, dry wood, even though it's a conifer wood like a pine, it is still pretty brutal on the tools, and you want to make sure you have a sharp edge at all times. It only takes a few moments to return to the sharpening station to sharpen up your bowl gouge. Now, I want to true up the surface of this. I'm not worried about getting this perfect because the majority of this material is going to be removed. What I do want is I want it to be nice and level so that I can mark this surface and know where I stand based on the template from the design for this coin funnel. Now, if you want to see how I came up with the design for this, check out the video prior to this video. I go into the detail about how I came up with the design and the pattern that I created for this piece. What I'm going to be doing is establishing various depths down into this bowl that I need to remove. It's going to be like an excavation. So here's the template. It's 2 sides, and the space from the center out to the outside has been divided into 5 equal-sized sections. I'm going to mark those sections here on this relatively flat surface. And these are going to be my guide points. The top curve that you see that drops down on that template is the curve that I'm going to be cutting down into this coin funnel. So this line is going to drop down, each line is going to drop down the distance that we see at that point.
If you're liking this video, please click that like button. Thank you.
Okay, so now we're going to start making more precise cuts. The passes I was just making were to remove material. Now we need to precisely get down to the exact depth for each of these sections. This first area is not going to drop that much. Each section will drop progressively more until we get to the center of this coin funnel. I'm using my 1/2-inch 55-degree bevel swept back bowl gouge. I'm going to do a back cut here. I want there to be a little ledge on the outside of this piece. I'm going to level that out, just very lightly making an open flute cut. Now, I'm measuring the depth at the line, and I also noticed that I had a bunch of torn out end grain fibers here for that ledge I was trying to create. So I need to be aware of that and be very careful. This kiln dried construction material essentially is very brittle. It's a difficult material to turn. It's very cheap, very affordable to use, but it's very difficult to turn. Now I'm going to use a diamond point scraper here. And what I'm going to do is I'm basically going to make a scoring cut to score through those ingrain fibers. So when I make a back cut to clean up that and meet that edge and create a little ledge there, those ingrains should not get ripped out. Now measuring the depth at that point, I'm putting a slight angle on it. Here you can see the depth that I need to add. It's 3/8 of an inch. This section needs to drop to 7/8 of an inch. The next section needs to drop to 1 3/8 of an inch, and so on. Here you can see where I've cut so far and how I'm angling that down into it. Now I have the first section to the desired depth. It's actually a little shy of that because I'm going to need to make some more passes to blend each section together. Now, if you've watched any of my other videos, you know this is very similar to how I like to do the inside wall of the bowl, where I will work a section, get the wall thickness I want, and then move down to the next section. Well, we're not really dealing with wall thickness here because this is a big bulky piece, but instead we're working with very precise depths, and then we're going to work each section and then blend those sections together. I'm not showing every time I'm going over to the sharpening station, but I'm stopping pretty frequently to sharpen this. I would say about every 10 minutes I'm freshening up my bowl gouge edges because they are dulling pretty quickly with this material. It's funny because you wouldn't think that. You think pine is a soft wood, it's not that big of a deal, but it is. It will definitely dull your tools. You want to sneak up on the depth, and it's a good idea to stop frequently and measure. You don't want to overcut this and make one area deeper than the other. So the concept of this coin funnel is that the circle inside portion of this gradually descends down into the funnel, but it does it so gradually that a coin can spin around inside of that and kind of wind its way down into the funnel at a gradual pace. I remember going to see the coin funnels when I was a kid and how much fun they were. They would usually be at the mall or some store, and there were great big plastic funnels, and you'd go beg your parents for some coins, and you would put the coins in there and watch them spin around and around and around, and then they would just disappear. Coin funnels are typically used for fundraisers or just for a business. People make a lot of money with the coins that get put into coin funnels. It's kind of interesting to think about. And you know what? That's another thing that the recessed mortise on this is kind of nice, because this whole piece could be set on a tabletop and you could play with it, or it could be mounted to a base, and the base could be turned so that it receives that recessed mortise. This could be one heck of a piggy bank, or it could be an income source for you potentially. Okay, so I'm stopping frequently and I'm measuring each section. I'm down to 7/8 of an inch for the second section. Now I need to proceed into the third section. I'm being careful not to completely remove that top pencil line. I'm just turning right down to that. And that's going to give me the top portion of which I can measure down from. So I'm maintaining that original top section, or the flat top surface, so that as a measuring point, I need some point for which I measure from. If I removed all that material, I wouldn't know how deep these passes are. And I can get a little more aggressive here because I'm just removing a bunch of material. I'm roughing this out. If it tears out a little bit, that's not a big deal because I'm not down to the surface, the final surface yet. But when I get closer to that final surface, I'm going to want to slow down my pace and make lighter passes so that I have a nice clean cut. So I'm not dealing with a whole bunch of torn out or messed up wood on that surface. It's interesting from this point of view, this turning is so big, you can barely tell that I've gone down inside there unless you look at that center section and compare it to the outside rim. This is 24 inches in diameter. I'm measuring the depth. And now I'm going to blend those two areas. If you see in the foreground there, I was picked up the line from the previous section and then continued down. Now what I don't want to do is I don't want to add a lot of depth to the previous section. So in other words, I know that where that last section ended, that was at the depth that needed to be. So I'm kind of connecting an invisible line between each of the sections and trying to make a smooth curved transition cut from one section to the next. Here I'm going to make a clean finishing cut across all of the surfaces to blend them together. I have the flute relatively open. This is my 1/2 inch 55-degree bevel swept back bowl gouge. This is the tool I like to do for finishing cuts. It has just been sharpened and I'm gliding across the top, riding the bevel with the flute open. Now you do not want to have that flute open like that. When I say the flute is open, that means it's pointing upward. If you have the flute open like that and you try to get aggressive with it, you can get a nasty catch. The bowl gouge can become overwhelmed very quickly. So you don't want that to happen. But I'm not doing that here. I'm making a really light shaving cut across the top. And I'm doing that to refine all of the transitions between each of these sections, blending each section into each other. I mentioned earlier that this piece is 24 inches in diameter. When I first had it all glued up, it weighed over 60 pounds. Yeah, it's a big turning. And you got to remember, something this large on your lathe is like a flywheel, so you want to be really careful with it and keep that lathe speed down. Remember, bowls are turned much slower than spindle turnings. Many of the small diameter spindle turnings, you can get up to several thousand RPMs. You don't ever want to do that with a bowl blank of any size, especially large bowl blanks. Now I've got a video all about lathe speed. You might want to check that out. It's very helpful for understanding how to set your lathe speed when you're turning bowls. Okay, so the first 3 sections have reached their depth and have been merged together. So I'm going to start removing the next section. And again, this is just roughing. This is my 5/8 inch 55-degree bevel swept back bowl gouge, and it is designed to move through the material a little bit quicker than the 1/2 inch. And I push a little bit harder and a little more aggressive with this than I am with the 1/2 inch. It has a slightly larger cutting area, so it removes material a little bit quicker than the 1/2 inch, and that's why I use it for roughing. Some people use a little bit larger, like a 3/4 inch roughing gouge, and that's fine. I just seem to like the 5/8 inch for roughing and the 1/2 inch for finish cuts. So I'm going to clean up this side wall. Just want to have a nice clean area that I can measure the depth from. I know I'm not down to where I need to be, but I just want to see where it is. I have to drop 2 inches and 3/8. So it's quite a bit of a drop from the previous section. So this is where the curve is starting to get a little bit more rapidly, or dropping a little bit rapidly into the center portion. It's pretty amazing the shape of this curve. If you think about the orientation of a coin rolling down this, that coin needs to stay perpendicular to the surface. So it has to build up speed when it starts dropping down into the hole. So it needs to be going fast enough that it can get almost 90 degrees on its side, and the centrifugal force is holding it up against, or holding it to, the surface of the coin funnel. So it's going to essentially lean as it goes down into this funnel, but the speed and the narrow diameter of this coin funnel will keep it pressed against the base or the surface of the coin funnel, if that makes sense. Leave me a comment below and let me know if you remember these coin funnels growing up, or if you know where there's coin funnels right now that you have access to. I don't see these very often anymore. I'm sure they're around. People have to have them somewhere. I've seen small ones, and I've seen small ones online that you can purchase, but most of those are like 10 to 12 inches in diameter, and the coin just goes into a really rapid spin immediately and just drops down in the hole. Kind of interesting, but not as fun as those great big ones. Those big ones growing up had to be at least a 3-foot diameter, maybe 4 feet, probably more than a yard or a meter in diameter, which was huge. This is 2 feet, the one I'm turning, and it's pretty massive. I can't imagine turning a 3-foot diameter one, but I'm sure it's possible. Now I'm backing up and I'm rubbing the bevel and just picking up each area and guiding it down into this deeper section. Now remember, I don't want to be cutting a lot to the left. The left area is at its proper depth. What I need to cut down to is the area I'm working right there. So each cut that I make, let's measure this, it's pretty close. Okay, that's actually going to work. I'm going to leave it right there for now. It's a little high, but I can always clean that up. Now I'm going to look in here. I have a 3-inch Forstner bit. I just measured the area that is going to be 1.5 inches wide, and it drops down 4 1/8 inch to this point right there. At that point inside the funnel, the diameter of the hole is 1.5 inches, or 3 inches rather. The radius is 1.5 inches. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to measure this just to make sure. Again, there's the 1.5 inch point, and there's the depth, 4 1/8. This 1-to-1 scale template is super valuable for this turning. Now I'm going to drive out the quill, and I'm going to put my Jacob's chuck in there and change out the bit. This is my 3-inch diameter Forstner bit. Now I need to turn this, or I need to drill down 4 1/8 inch, and I'm going to mark where that is on the bit. So it's right at the base of this bit. I'm going to drive down that far. Now I should meet the narrower turning, or the narrower drill hole that was made on the other side of this as I'm going in here. It's important to hold that Jacob's chuck so it doesn't spin in the hole. And it's also important to let the Forstner bit do all the work and get those shavings out of the way so it doesn't get bound up. So you pull the bit out occasionally, make sure those shavings are cleared, and then proceed a little bit deeper into the piece. You just want to take your time here. I'm turning solid material there, but then the material changes. It's becoming a little bit easier to cut. I think I'm down into the hole from the previous cut, or the narrower hole from the other side. Yeah, I've clearly met it at this point because it's cutting very easily. So I've reached my depth here. I'm going to back out the Forstner bit. And there's the piece overall. I want to show you guys this whole thing so you can see it from both sides and understand what we're dealing with here. You can see the curve a little bit. The hole is going all the way through down into, you can see the chuck in the inside there, which is pretty amazing. Now I just need to remove all of this material and continue the curve down into the funnel. And this is just a quick roughing cut. I'm excited to see if this is going to work. I've been thinking about this project for quite some time now. I thought it would make a smaller one of these, and then for some reason 2 feet seemed to just click in my mind. I'm like, yeah, I can do this with my lathe, and I think this would be cool to see. And at first, 2 feet didn't seem like it would be that big, but then when you see it in reality, it is very large. Now, we had talked about this in the previous video, but my lathe has a front section that's removable. The rails or the ways in the front of this lathe, that section comes out. So my swing, when all the rails are in place, is an 8-inch swing, meaning I can turn a 16-inch diameter piece. When I take out that section, then my swing is 16 inches, meaning I can turn a 32-inch diameter piece. And this is the robust Sweet 16 lathe. So what I'm doing here, I'm just being really careful, and I want to make each pass near the curve that the final cut will be. So I'm shifting my body weight and trying to make a smooth transition from where I am on the outside to the angles that are in the interior. I can see that the bottom corner of where the drill bit left off, that's what I need to match. So I'm blending this top edge down into where the Forstner bit left off. And then from there, I will continue the inside funnel. Again, this is my finishing bowl gouge, 1/2-inch bowl gouge. Okay, I can feel that the other area inside there is lower. So I've got this high spot that needs to be taken away. Now, if you can visualize three-dimensionally, you can see if I continued down deeper with that 3-inch Forstner bit, I would have ruined this hole underneath that. I would have made the whole thing much wider, and it wouldn't have this continuing tapered appearance. That's why I needed to stop at that 4 1/8 inch depth. Okay, I have the flute wide open, and it's okay because I'm making a really light pass here. Just want to be careful when you do this because it's easy to get the tip of the gouge overwhelmed, and that's when you get a catch. You shouldn't be afraid of catches. You should understand when those might occur and be aware of it and take precautions. Now, I've got an online course called Bowl Gouge Mastery. In that course, we deal with everything you need to know about mastering the bowl gouge. And one of the big things that we deal with in there is troubleshooting. A lot of people will have issues, and everybody has different issues, but guess what? They're all kind of predictable, and you can overcome them once you understand what is happening with the bowl gouge. And the troubleshooting section goes through everything that you can possibly have happen to your bowl gouge and explains what is happening and shows you how to overcome that. If you're just getting started with the bowl gouge, or if you want to truly master the bowl gouge, you should really check out the course. I think you're going to love it. All right, so I'm making really light passes here. And now what I need to see is I want to see how close I got these depths. So I'm going to cut out my 2-size template right along that curved line, and I'm going to use this as a guide. And right there, I can see I've got a high spot that needs to come down. And I've got one in here as well. And there's the high spot that I spotted out there. It's down here as well. So I'm going to go ahead and mark the surface so I can address that area. It's a good idea to take your time and use a pencil to mark those areas, because once everything starts turning, it's easy to start wandering around with your gouge and trying to fix things that might not need to be fixed. When you have the pencil marks there, you can see them while the lathe is turning, and you can see exactly where you need to be working. So I didn't really need to make much of a cut at that first pencil line, the middle pencil line is the high spot. So I need to remove that, and then I need to blend back out to the surface again when I get to the next pencil line. So what I'm doing is I'm taking down a high spot right in that area, and see how I have that flute wide open? I am just shaving a really light amount of material off and blending the surfaces back together right there. That's all I need to do. And looking down the side of the blank, I can see that I've got a little bit of area that I can work. You can see how small the shavings are coming off, and they're little cute curly cues there. I'm just shaving a little bit of the high spot. Now, it's important that you're not pressing the tool into your blank at this point. You want to be pressing down into the tool rest and simply let the piece come around and be shaved by the bowl gouge. If you push into the turning right now, any kind of ripples or imperfections in that wood, you're going to be riding those, and you're going to just keep accentuating those, and you're going to make a big mess. So you want to put all of your emphasis on putting down pressure into the tool rest. All right, I'm going to use the template again and check it. It's looking pretty good there. I can feel a couple things I need to deal with, so I'm going to just go back through here really carefully. I'm at a really fine point here where I can clean this up a bit with the bowl gouge, but it's so minute that it's probably going to be a lot easier just to deal with all of this surface in the sanding portion. We're talking about areas that have a really, really almost imperceivable height difference. If you have a light that's shining directly into this piece, there's a little bit of a high spot there I need to address. And there's the high spot in the middle. If you have a light shining directly on the face of this, you won't see these ripples. But if you shine the light down the side of the piece, you will see them. And it's something you really want to do. You really want to have a good shop light or multiple shop lights near your turning that you can control the direction of the light so you can see what's happening. And this is a great instance where it can help you tremendously. What you want to do is you want to shine the light right down the side of, I keep calling it a bowl, but it's a coin funnel. It could be a bowl. But you want to shine the light right down the side of it so the light is just going across the surface. And what's going to happen is any high spots are going to leave a shadow on the other side, so you'll see them really easily. That's why if you have a light, or if you have a big overhead light or lots of lights and you just have light flooding all over the place, then you're not going to see those high spots too easily. Having directional light that you can control is super beneficial for leveling out the surfaces. So I'm working out some of the areas. This is also important to realize. You can't just sand and then everything becomes magically smooth. If you have a high spot and a low spot and you run the lathe like you're seeing right here, those high spots and low spots will continue to be there. You're just going to change their location and make them bigger. So what you have to do is you have to, with the lathe off, you have to sand down the high spots until they're all level. Then you can sand with the lathe running like you see here. Now I'm going to go through all the grits. I'm starting at 120, going to 180, 220, and then 320. Trust your hands too, because you're going to feel those bumps. I'm going to go ahead and sand the exterior as well. Just take your time, work through the grits. You can turn with the lathe going, but you need to stop and then turn with the lathe off so you can smooth out any scratches or any high spots. Now this is a putty that I found that's really nice. It's a two-part epoxy putty that has a color in it. And what you do is you basically take off a little section of this, you knead it together, and that activates it. And this is a light wood color. It blends in really well with this piece. So you can press that down into a little space that we have here. I want to make sure there's as few imperfections on the surface as possible. Now I'm going to use some homemade shellac to seal this wood. Now I'm using this for a couple reasons. I'm using this somewhat as a sanding sealer. I'm also using it as a hardener, so it hardens the surface. I'm going to spray this with lacquer, and I want that lacquer to shine quickly. If I were to put lacquer on this with no finish, it's going to take a lot of coats of lacquer before the lacquer shines. So by putting the shellac on here, this is going to help seal up those ingrained fibers. It's going to stiffen the surface, and it's going to make it easier for me to do more sanding. I need to sand this more than most sanding I do typically on a turning, because to get a coin to roll across this surface without being interrupted is very tricky, and you really have to have a really nice, smooth, finished surface. All right, so here it is. This is the coin funnel. You can see down inside the coin funnel, you can see the chuck. Oh, I made a paper template to test and see what size I needed to have something to help feed the coin onto the bowl. So I made a wood version of the paper template. Simply took the measurements of the height of the track for the coin and the length of that. And that created the angle that I needed. I marked that on a piece of thin plywood. Went ahead and trimmed that out. And then I created the angle, cut the angle on this as well. And then I put that next to the cutoff portion, so the coin has something to rest on. Mark that, and we'll get that cut up. And we're about ready to roll some coins on the coin funnel. I know you've been waiting for this, because I've been waiting for it too. So we have our coin launcher, and we're ready. Here you can see it takes some experimenting and some trial and error to figure out the right angles to release the coins. But look at this, it's working. Oh my gosh, this is so cool. It's so much fun. Every coin is different, and every orbit is different. It's pretty fascinating to see and to try to figure out what affects each one of the orbits. Oh, this turned out so amazingly cool. Who would have thought 2x6s would look that cool as well?
Well, it turned out. I am so thrilled that this project turned out as well as it did. And I got to tell you, it was not easy. There were some hiccups in here, and I got a little confession. There were a couple times when I was close to being done with this that I took this off the lathe just to see how it would work. And you know what? It didn't work very well. And what I learned is that you really have to really make that surface perfectly flat all the way around. And one of the big advantages that you can use is your movable light over your lathe. If you take that down the side of the piece and shine it down the side, it's going to show you the ripples and the little bumps or the waves. Now, these waves were really subtle. It wasn't as if I could just put it back on the lathe and turn it and then take those high spots down. They were so subtle that they were microscopic, but they were visible with the light. You could see the shadow. So what I needed to do is I marked those and I sanded them out really well and just go around the whole piece and sand that area and lower it down. Now I did that with 80 grit sandpaper. That way it gets it down. Then I went back through the grits, 120, 240, 320, and smoothed it out. And by using the light down the side, it was easy to see where those high spots were and to correct those. So you really want to be very precise with a project like this, because those little coins, they get interrupted by just the smallest little difference in there, which really makes you think about things orbiting in space and all that. Obviously, space doesn't have little grooves and imperfections in wood surfaces, but you can imagine how easy it is for something to get thrown off course just by a little bit of a hiccup somewhere. I am really pleased with this piece. It's turned out really good. I hope you had fun watching this, and let me know by leaving me a comment if you're going to build a coin funnel or a black hole or a vortex bowl. Let me know, and if you do, be sure you share it with me, because I'd love to see how it turns out. It's super cool. It's a little bit challenging, but I think these videos lay out how you can do it too if you'd like. It's a lot of fun, and I don't know, it was just one of those things. I had to do it. I had it in my head. I was like, can this be done? I don't know. And sometimes those are the best projects because you don't really know going into it whether it's going to work or not. So that's what makes it fun too. So I'm going to go play with my coin funnel now. Do me a huge favor, subscribe if you're not already subscribing, and if you haven't yet, please click that like button. Now, you clicking that like button helps this video, helps the channel, and I thank you for that. So thank you very much. Also, check out my website, turntowoodbowl.com. Over there, I've got everything you need to know to turn all the bowls you imagine, and you will learn all the techniques you need to know to make a coin funnel or a black hole as well. It's basically the same techniques. So check out my website, turntowoodbowl.com. All right, guys, thank you so much for watching. Until next time, as always, happy turning.